The unanswered question is, how much of long COVID is actually side effects of the vaccines? So this is part of this kind of greater conspiracy that seems to be going on and seems to be perpetuated. And the trouble is there is an element of truth to this, and I think there's a very important point that is well worth discussing. And the thing is that there is a percentage of people who have these kind of long COVID type effects following the vaccination. And that is not something to be dismissed. But the trouble is that we have this overwhelming kind of conspiracy theory and this push towards this crazy new technology, injured everyone who had it is riddled and is controlled by Bill Gates, and that's not the case. But there is a serious element to this, and that is that there is some people who are still suffering with side effects following the vaccine, so it is important to take care of that as well. Man, I feel this. My strength has always been resolve and fitness. Having that stripped away has been one hard hit. I totally get this, and for so many people, fitness, training, pushing all the time is your way out, and it's your way of dealing with any problems that you might have, and it's a way of feeling worthy and feeling like you're pushing towards and working towards something. And for me, there is nothing harder, nothing more difficult than sitting still and not being able to do any of that. And that has proven to be a new challenge and something that I've had to overcome, and many people have to overcome. And in many ways, I think it is tons more difficult because pushing every moment of the day, whether it be training 3 times a day, working, to me, that's easier. It's easier to just keep going and keep pushing. And having to be in that position where I've had and been forced to stop and forced to just sit in that space is very, very difficult. But it's a skill that you can develop, and it's something that gets easier over time. Thank you for speaking out. The only reason people believe me about my long COVID is I had it before anyone even knew it existed, March 2020. Thankfully, I am 95% back to normal. I hope anyone still suffering from long COVID eventually finds relief and recovery from it. I suffered for 2 years and spent another year slowly coming out of it. I don't think I could have continued on the way I was. Stay strong. Recovery can happen. Firstly, I love seeing these recovery stories, and I think there's so much negativity and there's so many horror stories that you see out there of people still ill after 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years even. And to hear about people who are recovering or at least getting back to a quality of life that is relatively normal is incredible. And I think it's very difficult at the very onset of COVID when people didn't necessarily know what was going on, and suddenly you're just having this barrage of symptoms, and it was very difficult to get any kind of diagnosis or any kind of understanding as to what was going on. Lots of research being done, but none looking at the brand new technology that was rolled out across the world. Totally bizarre. So I don't know why there's this kind of conspiracy that this is some kind of brand new technology. I mean, vaccines have been around for a long time, and pretty much every single person probably would have had a vaccine when they were younger. I'm certainly against any of this forced vaccination or anything along these kind of lines, but there is this kind of underlying conspiracy that anybody who has any kind of long-lasting symptoms or any kind of chronic illness must be a result of this brand new technology. And yeah, I don't really understand it. This is kind of like anti-establishment rhetoric that's been going around, but yeah, I think it's totally bizarre. But there is one thing that I will point out, and that is that there are some people who, as a result of the vaccine, have had some kind of long COVID type symptoms. And obviously there's the reactions that we know about that are risks with vaccines, like the palpitations, myocarditis. Those episodes do happen, but there is a phenomena where people are getting these kind of long COVID symptoms following vaccinations. And from the data that I've seen, very, very rare, relatively low. But it is something that is worth talking about and looking into. So many familiar things here. Very interesting interview. I always enjoy the one with former athletes. It's tough to lose who you are and deal with it. The athlete part, I totally get and I totally sympathize with, because if you're somebody who has spent your whole life training, your whole identity is kind of wrapped up in what you're able to achieve, your ability to train, your ability to push through, it's so incredibly difficult to go from that and have that stripped away from you, to the point where you may be bedbound, or you can't do that anymore. And it really does feel like a kind of wrenching of your identity, and something that is difficult to come to terms with. But there is hope, and there is prospect for recovery, and there is prospect for a better quality of life in the future. I think chronic illness is a huge issue from an awareness standpoint, because women are not believed by doctors, which is a deeper issue within the medical community, while for men, we don't speak up enough about it. I've experienced both sides, not seeing men well represented within the chronic illness community, especially on social issues, for fear of being looked upon as weak and not manly, and also being looked at by doctors as if some sort of mental health thing. I think the dismissal as a kind of mental health issue is so common across the board, and it's something that I experienced very early on. And I went in, I was like, there's something just not right. I can't exercise, I can't do anything, I feel bizarre. And they were like, yes, probably anxiety. And I think that is so true across the board, probably especially so with girls as well. And I think the point about guys here as well is very valid. I can speak from experience. I think when you have this kind of ability to provide and to care and to work for the people that you love, have that stripped away is super difficult. And I'm sure this happens with both sides, but certainly from my experience, it really kind of tears and leaves a hole. But I think there's a wider issue of not believing and not coming forward right across the board. Health systems and employers count economic cost of long COVID. Yeah, so there's a incredible problem when it comes to the economic and societal impact of these longer term conditions in the future, because it's not just the kind of quality of life point of view that is going to affect people, but it's also that economic impact as well. There was recently a report, the Cutler report, and that quantified the loss of earnings at 3.1 trillion from post-COVID conditions. And we see that in our own economy as well. If you look at the data when it comes to number of people out of work, long-term sick, the numbers are huge, and they're only increasing. Now, we have to be careful, and we have to assess whether that is purely just because of long COVID, and it is right to question that and to look at other issues, whether it's mental health, lack of appointments, stalled appointments from the COVID pandemic. But there is something in that, and we see a huge spike following COVID, as you can see on the screen. And it is important to look at those numbers. And for me, one of the most important things that we can do when it comes to advocating and pushing for change is to highlight this economic impact, because there's only so far that sympathy route can go. There's only so far that people want to hear a sob story and want to hear about how much you're suffering and all of this kind of stuff. But if we can target and attack the economic impact, then that is something that we can quantify, and we can show to people where this is going to affect society, the GDP in the future, and so on. So I think attacking this route, showing the numbers out of work, showing the level of unemployment and the effect that this will have on the GDP is the way to go when it comes to advocating. Did you have anxiety with long COVID? Mine is a rush that starts when I wake up and lasts all day. Yeah, so in the initial stages, I had this kind of intense paranoia-like anxiety, and it was like nothing I've experienced before. It was like that kind of fear that somebody is watching you and chasing you at all times. And a lot of people would be like, oh, maybe you just had anxiety, maybe you're just depressed, whatever. And I'm like, that's just not the case. It was just like an abnormal, just bizarre kind of feeling that I've never experienced in my life. Not like any kind of normal anxiety. Not that there's a normal anxiety, but it was like nothing else. And yeah, I also agree. It started very much in the morning and had this kind of rush. For me, it's subsided now. And the things that kind of helped me, first of all, was some kind of simple basic sleep hygiene stuff. So making sure that when you go into bed, you're not on your phone, making sure that you, relax and decompress before going to bed. When you wake up, again, don't go on your phone. Try and get some sunlight to set your circadian rhythm. All of these kind of stuff helped me to get a little bit better sleep. But then some other stuff like the meditation, the breath work, cold showers, all of this massively helped. I think just regulating your nervous system and allowing you to enter more of a rest and digest mode is very, very helpful. So those are the kind of things that I would recommend. How did you schedule the work with nervous system? Did you do something every hour, say box breathing? How did it practically look? So I make a point to start my day with the most important thing. For me, that's my health. So I get up, I will do a meditation. So I'll do half an hour meditation, slow breathing, and then I'll jump in and have a cold shower. Again, this isn't because I'm some kind of health guru and business guru who says that cold showers and meditation is the only way to make 10K a month. That's not the case. But for me, it's about getting up and doing the thing that is at the top of your priority list straight away in the morning. And for me, that is doing the work around my health. So straight away when I start my day, I've had half an hour of doing this kind of nervous system regulation stuff, and that's already out the way. And then I will try and stick something in around lunchtime. I usually do some work, and then my brain will usually be a bit fried by lunch. So I'll put in some time at lunch to do some kind of meditation, breath work, something along those lines as well. But I'm not too rigorous about it. I don't think you want to be obsessive. I think when I've become obsessive with it and had a checklist and listed off every single thing that I wanted to get done, I haven't found it helpful. And I found that has in turn generated more stress, which has put more strain on me and my nervous system. So I'd say put in some blocks of time to do the kind of work and this kind of stuff that you want to be doing, but don't sweat it. Don't overkill, and try and make it a daily part of your life that's sustainable. Thanks, Harry. That's great. Are you running again without PEM? To be totally honest, I'm not really much of a runner. I don't really like running, but I am doing training, and I do a lot of kind of like gym work. I do ring work now. I've started doing calisthenics. I think the core of this question is, do I get PEM? And for those who don't know, that's post-exertional malaise, which is this kind of achy, flu-like feeling after you do some kind of exercise. It's totally bizarre. It's something I've never experienced before, very difficult to explain. But the answer to that is I do to a degree, but it's very, very mild now compared to what it was. So for context, back in the initial phases, if I went out for a walk and did 500 meters, I would collapse in bed when I got back, and I would feel awful. My head would be spinning. I'd feel like I'm coming down with a flu. But now I can go and do a gym session. I can do a load of pull-ups, do pretty much largely whatever I want. And the post-exertional malaise that I will get afterwards is pretty mild. And it's this kind of similar to the kind of low-grade flu-y feeling I have at most times. But again, all of that is very, very mild nowadays. So I'm truly blessed to be in this position where I can live a normal life. I can do all these videos, I can work, I can train. It's honestly incredible. Good idea, but the problem I see is the focus on new drugs. There are already many approved drugs which are very promising. This is an excellent point, and developing new drugs and treatments takes years and years and billions, literally billions of pounds. So the drug development process when it comes from pharma usually takes 12 to 15 years. Often it can be 2-3 billion, and we simply don't have that kind of money and we don't have that kind of time. So the route that I think is more promising is looking at drug repurposing. So this is using drugs that already have been tested. They already have an existing safety profile. So they've been through all of the development process. They've been through all the initial testing phases, and they're proven to be safe and effective for other conditions. And what we need when it comes to drug repurposing is essentially access to the drug, and then we run a simple, relatively small trial. If that proves to be successful, we can then move that to regulation through NICE, and then it can be prescribed and used. Now, the trouble here is getting money in, because most of these drug repurposing trials, I spoke to Claudia a little while back who was doing one of these, and the issue here is getting money in, because usually the grants come from government. They don't come from external investors or people looking to donate. So the way I see it, that when it comes to drug repurposing, we have two options. We can either push and try and find more philanthropists to give us money to try and run multiple drug repurposing trials that will hopefully then be successful, or we can look at trying to do a for-profit model. And that would involve getting people to invest and trying to get some kind of IP rights on these drugs, which I think is going to be a bit of a challenge. But getting these IP rights, developing trials for each of these repurposed drugs, and hopefully one or two of them will come through, and then we can start to monetize that and pay back the investors, because there is only so far that non-for-profit can do, and it's the kind of sad state of affairs that generally money makes the world go round. And so if we can harness this for-profit element and we can harness investors, we will be able to pile so much more money in. But we've got a long way to go. I feel like I'm in a very similar place to you now. Over 2 years in, all my symptoms being neurological, I'm back to living a normal life, weight training a few times a week, back rolling BJJ, what's important to me as I own a BJJ school, but still get weird head pressure, brain fog, spells of fatigue, and a few other bits. Like you, don't feel 100% there, but I'm grateful and believe I'll get there. I love to see another martial arts fan on the channel. That makes me very happy. Again, I love to see these stories of people who have either recovered or got back to a quality of life that is more than acceptable. And I want to share as many of these as possible. I want to hear as many of these as possible, because when you hear these, it gives you an element of hope. It makes you feel more optimistic for the future. And this isn't to say that, you know, people who aren't recovering aren't doing something properly, or they're not doing this and they need to try harder, etc. But for me, I take great hope and a great optimism in seeing people who have got back to, like here, rolling in BJJ, doing weight training several times a week. And for me, it doesn't matter how bad or how severe you are, seeing those stories and those types of recovery stories surely gives you hope and surely gives you some kind of optimism to the future. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't tirelessly stop working to research and find cures and develop treatments, but seeing these kind of recovery stories, I think is incredibly motivational. And yeah, thank you. I'll keep bringing them in. COVID was never about a virus. It's a mass depopulation plan. Gates, Schwab have openly told us this was coming. Wakey, wakey. So the thing I find really funny is that it's always the people who tell you you're a sheep who end up being the biggest sheep themselves. And just because you get your information from BBC News or from other kind of institutions and not from Facebook chat rooms, that makes you a fucking sheep. But yeah, I like seeing these comments. They are good fun. Hey, do you know any guided meditation / mindfulness programs that are good? Yeah, so I've used several different tools, and the first would be Headspace. I found that very useful. It was quite cheap, quite easy to set up, and quite good for just doing regular meditations. But if you wanted something that has a slightly more philosophical approach and went a little bit more in depth, I would really, really recommend the Waking Up app by Sam Harris. I'm a huge fan of Sam's work. I think he's great. And I really, really enjoy his more kind of philosophical approach to meditation and not seeing it merely as this kind of means to an end and simply a stress reduction technique. It's so much more than that. And I think it's a little bit of an insult just to kind of commodify it as a simple health benefit and stress reduction tool. I think there's so much more to meditation than meets the eye, and that course really, really delves into that. It really helps you to kind of see what the true purpose behind meditation is. It helps you to kind of understand where your thoughts are coming from and simply observing them and kind of stepping back from this constant perpetual state of looking forward into the future. And I found that very, very useful. There's tons of different exercises, tons of different approaches from different teachers. So that would be my favorite and the one that I would recommend the most. Oh my God, Dr. Ali, I don't know how to appreciate your effort for healing me from herpes virus. God bless you, sir. At Dr. Ali Healing Home. Yeah, so this sounds super, super legit, guys. So what I'll do is leave the link to Dr. Ali in the description and let me know how you get on.